You are live. Woo! We are live. All right, give y'all a second to filter in. This month is Backpack Awareness Month. So we're not going to be talking specifically about backpacks, even though backpacks are heavy. But I think the main focus we need to get here, and we'll tie it in all together though, there's a book called Attention, Balance, and Coordination, right? And so I think that's a very important topic because we have kids that are sitting a lot now. They're sitting, they're carrying heavy backpacks, and we're not getting as much movement, assuming they're not playing any sports, right? And so I think we should talk about this as a whole, what this all means, because historically what I've seen in my practice and in my office is as the school year starts and we're getting to this first set of tests that they're getting through. I just had a high schooler said she's got her first set of tests coming up tomorrow, and there's already stress in the air, right? So it seems like summer hasn't even ended yet, but there's already stress. So let's talk about this a little bit. Attention, balance, and coordination. Are those all related? And what is it? The ABCs, right, of this all. So, Heather, attention, balance, and coordination. How does this all kind of this is a big question, I know, so I know you'll have a magnificent answer, but how does this kind of all tie together? Because I don't think a lot of parents, and I don't even think a lot of health care professionals as a whole, I think there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding here. Tie attention, balance, coordination, and even just the whole sitting and backpack and all that stuff and the impact that it has on our sensory motor system.
Yeah, that is a big question. But this goes back to one of our mottos is we learn first in our sensory motor system. It translates into cognitive development or holds it back. And one of the balance, equilibrium, vestibular system is one of the earliest systems to develop as early as 5 months old. And then kids have to keep adjusting because their center of gravity changes as they get taller. But it is the captain of the ship. It's part of our internal sensory system. I need to know, have my bearings about me, know where I am in space, where I am in relation to motion, its subconscious processing of gravity, before I can attend to other things. And that we know that the vestibular system is the captain of the ship that tells the eyes what to do. It's the captain of the ship that's super involved in auditory processing that can coexist or be mistaken for attention issues, super tied to anxiety. In fact, about 60% of individuals who have vestibular issues also have anxiety, 45% depression. And it's very tied to decreased concentration. Y'all know that feeling when you have a head cold or sinus infection, you don't have your bearings about you, and you just have to concentrate so much harder. You're so much more exhausted. So it's equilibrium that tells my eye movements what to do. If my eye movements are off, it impacts focus, like visual, actual things being in focus visually, which is perception just as much as it is acuity. And it impacts eye tracking when you're reading, et cetera. This is foundational, and when this is awry, even other things either have to compensate or they don't work as well.
The one thing I love about you, Heather, is you have such a wealth of knowledge that you're just trying to condense it into something that we can consume, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're right.
But yes, so it all plays a role, and so we have kids who ideally were more active during the summer. Now they're less active, right? And they're growing, right, at just incredible rates. The brains, the brain, the body, they're all growing. And so the brain's always taking in this sensory motor information, recalibrating, growing, learning, right? And then we go to sitting to 8-9 hours a day. And then we don't get the exercise. We're carrying these heavy backpacks, and then we go home. And what do we get to do? We get to do homework at night, right? So you see this massive spike in kids struggling with attention, focus, anxiety, depression right about this time, because there's just what they need from their sensory motor system, from their input and all that stuff for their brain is just not being emphasized. That's the word I want to use. It's just not being encouraged as much. And so I see massive spikes right now. In attention and focus concerns. And so this all does play attention or roll together. And so it's amazing.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have a chance to share this with Heather prior to this conversation. but there's a study, I'll put a link in here. Examine.com shared a study out of India. And they were, I think, 700 kids they followed, and they monitored screen time and neurodevelopmental diagnoses. And there's a strong correlation between kids who had excessive over an hour of screen time and a diagnosis of neurodevelopmental. So it's right there. I mean, we have the information.
Yeah. And you're tying this back to sedentary versus movement, which is so important, because in our vestibular system, we also have static balance and dynamic balance. And so it doesn't mean that kids might have issues in all the areas, but 68% of quote unquote underperforming students, that can be a misnomer, because that can indicate they're not really trying, but something's a hurdle. They're called underperforming. 68% of students across the country from elementary through high school who are described that way have a confirmed equilibrium issue. This is based on studies of tens of thousands of students. And that doesn't even count the ones who have not been assessed for it. But static balance, we are always using equilibrium to stay upright and balanced in our chair. If that's off, we can't engage our core the way we need to. And the core is important because it fires off neurons from the cerebellum to other parts of our brain. 200 million neurons get going that help me with focus, processing, learning, emotional regulation, critical thinking, problem solving, etc. All of this time management, organization stuff. And then we have dynamic balance, where you're in motion, but we think of that as sports, but it's also, we learn those things first in a gross motor coordination fashion. Gross motor coordination translates into the eyes working as a team, translates into me being able to change my head position when I'm writing and still be at balance, just like I am when my head is up. You're still moving your arm and your hands to do fine motor. It translates into the auditory signals crossing the midline so that I process all the instructions. So I love this, the static versus dynamic thing, which is very important in the sedentary lifestyle, absolutely impacts the growth of neural pathways.
So obviously I know the answer, but could somebody, could you have, and you already mentioned it, but I want you to go a little bit further in this, because I can have an athlete, right, who's very dynamic, but once you put them in a seat, gone. And so I think there's a lot of confusion around that, right? Because I got this, this athletic son. He's give him he'll catch anything, just grabs it out of the air when he's playing football. But the moment he sits, it just gone. Like, they cannot focus, pay attention, write, learn. They just struggle. And so what you're saying is really two different sides to that coin, correct?
Yes, that is one of the hardest things for parents to digest. And I get it, because it's like, my child is the best player on the team in 3 or 4 different sports, and now you're going to tell me he has cross-body coordination or equilibrium challenges. It doesn't mean, sometimes it's almost invisible. It doesn't mean they're falling over on their face. Remember, my equilibrium was awful, and yet I was very athletic. So, okay, when all of my gross motor is engaged and I'm standing or in this certain position, I can do it. But then when I'm sitting down and my head is over, if you're batting, if you're throwing a football, catching it, your head is not in that position. It's a different part of that processing system. And so you can be so coordinated on one level. We have a lot of kids who have developed, when we talk about cross-body coordination, we must be able to use both sides of our bodies in complementary but opposing actions. We first learn to do mirror things like clapping, and then we learn to do things where you're steering with one hand, shifting gears with the other, putting on your seatbelt, that's crossing the midline. That requires a ton of brain communication. Those pathways have to be laid before my eyes cross the midline, so I have visual focus to take in the whole visual field. Before my eyes team together, this is also coordination. This is what your eyes are doing when you look far and near. Sometimes visual perception will work with gross motor, but not with fine motor. That's another kind of hand-eye coordination. And so it doesn't mean that we're not saying they don't have athletic abilities, but sometimes we had a senior in high school who had a rowing scholarship for an Ivy League university, and his timing was off. And you think, rowing, are you serious? And sure enough, he didn't get stuff. But when I have rhythm and timing in my motor system, it also translates into time management, organization, prioritizing, task initiation. He did not have that fine-tuned thing that he needed to get assignments turned in on time, and he was about to lose his scholarship because of it.
That was some high level neurology there, and I loved every second of it. But one of the things I want to go back to what you're talking about as far as cross communication, because let me adjust this just a hair. Sorry. One of the things that I see, and I would love to hear how often you see this. I would say probably 7 or 8 out of 10 kids struggle with the cross crawl exercise. So they had some form of, they didn't crawl long enough, or they went straight to walking, which is, a lot of parents love and try to encourage, right? But not just understanding what's going on. But a lot of these kids, when you, it's also called a bird dog exercise, but when you put them on their hands and knees and you ask them to put out one arm and the opposing leg, so it kind of mimics crawling, I've seen kids bog down, like their brain, it takes them 4 seconds to process, okay, this arm goes out, what leg? They just can't do it. And so it's just so, what you're talking about is just so fundamental. You have to think about that from a living a world aspect and functioning in a world aspect. When they're asked to perform this cross pattern action, this generally is in really clumsy kids, by the way, but they just can't do it. Like it literally bogs down their brain. I've seen adults all the time too, and they struggle with all sorts of different things. We dive into that, but what you talked about here was just absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, it is. And we too have kids who struggle with that, but also we will have them do things with their eyes open and their eyes closed. And you look at the difference in that. What we don't realize is that if my eyes are open and I'm standing up, I have something I can look at to help me keep my bearings and stay upright. Because if I'm like this, I'm like, oh wait, now that stuff looks crooked. And I learn to get back up to midline. That system needs to be working without the help. Yes, the whole sensory system works together. But if that child cannot stay upright without swaying with their eyes closed, it means they're having to rely on visual or other senses too much. That is a churn. We do not want one part of the system to have to compensate for the other, because that is a beating and a half. And then they get worn out because they're compensating and churning their cognitive capacity. The needle moves up much faster. Now I have this much space left to give. School's boring. I'm going to give you a fight about my homework. I'm going to lash out. I'm not going to have any tolerance for a different point of view. It comes out emotionally. It may not come out in the grade. How hard are they working to do it? So it's cool that we can compensate when there's no other choice. These kids with neurodevelopmental struggles, you take care of that quality of life and thriving instead of just getting by, not based on a number on a test, but on if you have kids who are making awesome grades, but you're seeing emotions and behaviors come out, there's probably a compensation going on.
Yeah, and I love what you talk about, because I always tease my kids and I say, now it's time for ninja mode, right? But because I have them close their eyes, but just the simple tests that police officers do, where they have you stand there like kind of like a pencil, feet together, arms at your side, and you'll have a kid and they'll be focused and they're not doing anything. The moment they close their eyes, they look like a drunk sailor. They are just all over the place. It is incredible. It's such an easy test and just tells you so much about that. And then also the finger to nose test. You wouldn't believe how many people struggle with this. Kids, adults, you do finger nose and they're okay with their eyes as long as they can follow it, right? But the moment they close their eyes, or I've had kids touch their lips.
I've had kids miss altogether. Even that's a more extreme, but yeah. And it's not because they don't know where the nose is. That's very telling. And I just want to emphasize that. Okay, let's say you have a child. You're like, okay, I'm going to try a couple of these things and have them close their eyes and do things. Not a problem. Still doesn't mean that the sense of balance is 100% on point. We have some kids who have that sway postural stability thing that then impacts core engagement, which impacts nutrients to the brain for all of these functions. But sometimes all of that's on point, but then it doesn't work when it comes to visual perception, eye tracking, taking information from the chalkboard to the desk, knowing where to put something in a planner where it means anything whatsoever. And that's a spatial concept. Math is a spatial concept. Maybe their eyes are jumping when they're reading. So it doesn't mean that it's across all realms of balance. I mean, that's one of the reasons why it can be so invisible almost if you don't know what to look for.
100%. And then I agree with you completely. But sometimes you'll ask them, and they're like, "Yeah, the pediatrician had him do this," and the pediatrician are not attacking pediatricians or anything like that. Please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But they'll have them do it for 3 or 4 seconds. I'm telling you, you put a kid there, you can get an athlete, right? They can be good for 5, 6, 7, 10 seconds. You start fatiguing that neurology, and they start missing.
Yes.
And so sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging. I know you're great at digging. We love to dig too, but sometimes you're like, oh, I got this, right? And then they're like, oh, I poke myself in the
That's
eye. How did
right.
that happen, right? And so you have to understand neurology as a whole, and it can't be just a simple, oh, I could do that. There's timing, and sometimes you have to put a little bit more stress on it for them to really kind of show you their weaknesses. But all of that is so intimately tied together. But it goes to, again, so if you can't do
Yeah.
this, then we have eye issues, reading issues, all sorts of other things that can jump on top of that as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
That
I
that
thought I'd
timing
jump
thing
on
that you
top.
said, we have some kids who can do those no, on those motions, but they can't do it to like we will have a metronome going, do it to the beat, and they can't do it to the beat. Guess what? Those same kids, time management, organization, prioritizing, task initiation. Sometimes it might be sounding out words. It depends on. There's so many different variables there. But yes, to your point, when we're doing an assessment, we don't just have them do things. It's like, can they do it for less than 10 seconds, 15, 20, 25, 30, 60 seconds? That is telling also. And if they can do it at first and can't, like Brian said, that means it's not automated. They're having to work too hard and they run out of fuel, because that's an act that they shouldn't have to concentrate on to do. And if they do, they can't continue to do it for as long often.
Yeah, your neurology will start just burning fuel to keep up, and so and you can burn out what's called ATP, right? You can burn out the fuel system in that neurology and those networks really quick, and so sometimes with all the great intentions that they do it, they're just not doing it long enough. They're not testing long enough. But once you do test it, it pops up. I swear to God, I've had a kid who, like, for 20 seconds was rock solid, and like the 21st second fell apart on me. And I was like, he just went, and then taxed out on me. But it told me a lot, right? It told me a lot about what he's dealing with, and help me better understand it. But this is all playing again, tension, balance, coordination. This is all part of executive function, time management. All of this is playing an intimate role together. So
yeah. It even, having your sense of where you are in space even impacts kids getting overwhelmed with noise, because if I can localize where sound is coming from, which I need equilibrium to do, I have multiple volume dials. Okay, Brian's talking to me from the den. Let me mentally turn down the TV and the dishwasher and turn up the sound of his voice. In class, let me tune out all extraneous noise and hone in on what the teacher's saying. That has to do with, where am I in space? Where is the sound coming from? And then I can turn up, turn down volume. Don't get distracted, because I can hone in on the right information. Selective attention. And that is hugely impacted usually with kids these are kids who you might describe as their hearing tests are normal, but they don't seem to hear as well, or they have difficulty with background noise, or they're sensitive noise. They think things are loud that aren't. They're loud talkers. And you want to know one of the biggest signs. I'm going to give you one for younger kids and older kids. Signs of equilibrium issues. Of course, it could be something else, but signs that are very visible that people don't think about in relationship to this. Little ones who are wrapped around their parent's leg somewhere. That looks like social anxiety. Equilibrium issues lead to social anxiety very, very frequently. But it might be, you're my anchor because I'm not anchored in of myself. So your leg is my anchor. That is my equilibrium for me. Or with older kids who aren't going to do that, they're at a party, they might just look like the cool cat, but they're backed up. They're kind of leaning back against a wall. They might even have one of their knees bent and the foot on the wall. That wall is bracing them. Right. That so frequently is a sign of equilibrium issues. It's like seeking something extraneous to be your anchor, and it doesn't look like they're upset. Doesn't look like it's equilibrium issues don't mean dizziness necessarily. That's, often it doesn't mean that.
Yeah. What do we always talk about? Behavior, right? Behavior is communication. I actually love those two examples. Those are fantastic examples. The kid who clings to the leg, you're their literal lifeline in a sense, because you're what stabilizes their world. And as Heather has told her story, and she didn't know what she didn't know, when her parents didn't know what she didn't know, that behavior, clinging to the leg, is two people not knowing what they don't know, right? Like, that kid can't say my world is spinning and I can't gain control. And eventually they just kind of, their neurology, kind of works itself into that, thinking that is normal. But I mean, that's a tell. I see that all the time, right? They cling, or the anxiety, or they're really, really shy. Now they're just trying to stay up. They're just trying to stay up. And I was a cool kid who leaned against the wall. So, but yes, no. What was one thing I was like? Okay, so I know we talk about this frequently, but I want to push our way into this again because I'm seeing a lot of it, and I think it's always important to kind of go back to this. When our world is, essentially in disarray, we have trouble turning the volume down or whatever we need to do, and we can't, our GPS system is skewed, and we're struggling to navigate. One of the things that always happens is what our autonomic nervous system can kick in, survival mode, right? And so I see a lot of kids who, we talk about this all the time, but it's their system is just churning all day, and emotion, they just get very emotional. Or we see some dietary stuff too, right? Like, I see GI issues are starting to pick back up again. Constipation, diarrhea is a struggle, and so they're having some regulatory issues with the autonomic nervous system too. Is kicking in. It's too much. I'm churning so hard, and the system is losing and spinning out of control. So I think that's one thing to always keep an eye on, parents, because they'll start getting sick a lot, right? Because that system regulates the immune system, so kids always get sick, right? Or all this other stuff. But this is a big one that I'm seeing that lots of people are not talking about right now, is that autonomic nervous system.
100%. I mean, when we talked about the sympathetic parasympathetic system in a couple of shows a while back, we talked about how that impacts organ function. It impacts how well your body fights off germs, how well it knows when to turn the brake pedal on. Like, we don't need to fight it anymore, so the body's not beating up itself. Inflammation. There is such a strong link between issues with balance, equilibrium, and mental health issues, especially by the time kids get to be teens. Sometimes why they lack self-confidence in social situations is they are so overwhelmed because multiple voices are talking. Part of the way I localize that, make sense of that, I got to be grounded first, because with my equilibrium, this is overwhelming. I'm supposed to enjoy being around friends. This stinks. I'm stressed to the max. What is wrong with me? And so then they start withdrawing, and they're becoming antisocial. They just want to hide in the room. They want to be still. If I'm still, maybe I finally can get my bearings about me. Whereas if I get up and move and engage in the world, I have more balanced information to process. And so kind of becoming static like that is something to look for. On the flip side, if kids are hanging upside down off of furniture, swing me, spin, they might be undersensitive. We have some kids, we test their equilibrium. They do not know when they're moving and when they're still. That makes the world just as confusing as the other way around.
100%. Yeah, so you have fight, flight, or freeze, right? And that's part of the withdrawal mechanism. We're pulling in, trying to calm our world. That's real common. That's what I'm seeing a lot of right now. But I also love the other aspects of it, right? Like, we're not getting enough stimulation, right? I had a girl who just spun. Her mom would talk to her, she would just spin on the kitchen floor. Just, if you wanted a conversation with her, she just spun. And the mom's like, I don't understand. But, she was trying to get some information going, right? She was trying to stimulate her system. But you see this happen all the time. The unfortunate part is when we get overly stimulated and then we really shut back down. Those kids are really tough. I've seen that with real severe anxiety, depression cases too, right? So that system can get skewed really fast and really cause some major issues. But both of those were, great points.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to point out one other thing, because this balance and coordination, it relates to all areas of learning, one degree or another, and of course, depending on which part of the system is impaired in an individual. But think about how hard it is to learn directional words: left, right, between, beside, in front of, behind, etc. If you don't know where you are in space, you start trying to memorize these words that you don't have background knowledge for them because you don't even know where you are in space. So it's like, let me memorize this. It doesn't make as much sense. A lot of times that is why kids have difficulty following instructions. Pay attention. If your instructions have directional words or they have to go to multiple rooms instead of it all being right here, does that change how well they follow the instruction? Aside from auditory processing and other factors, directional words or going to multiple places, the equilibrium is an enormous underlying factor for so many issues with transitions. You have kids who lose it when they have to go from one center at school to another center, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes. That body awareness is, just generically speaking, always very poor in a majority of these kids. They have no sense of self-awareness, social distancing. They just completely kind of lost. Like they just don't have a good gauge of where they are in space. And you're 100% correct. Like transitions for them are extremely difficult. But when you understand this, it completely makes sense. We are at the 25 or 26 mark now, so we're trying to keep this between 25 and 30. Is there anything else that you want to touch on here?
I'll say one thing is that one of the reasons, there's a couple of big reasons why swimming is such a good activity for kids who are having these struggles. One is that equilibrium is information I'm processing subconsciously about gravity and motion. Well, in the water, you're taking gravity out of the equation. And so a lot of kids, that thing that makes them feel different from other people out in the world, in the water, it's an equalizer. Yeah. And so sometimes they feel more settled in the water. Now, the other thing is, of course, nothing applies to everyone, but that I have so many kids who they don't want to do any exercise. You get them in the water, they'll go all day long. Yep. And the other reason it's so important is because you're using both sides of your body in complementary but opposing actions, bilateral coordination. You're using, when we think about coordination, it's left and right hemisphere working together. It is the top and the bottom of the body working together. And it is the front. If you slice your body down the middle, it's the front and the back side of the body. There are 3 planes we think about. You're hitting all of those planes and getting neural connections going like crazy, left to right hemisphere, front to back of the brain.
100%. I love that you brought that up. That's fantastic. I always suggest swimming because obviously kiddos and that whole bird dog exercise that I talked about earlier, it's a great way because you can really only swim efficiently if you can get opposing limbs firing, in conjunction. So that's a great way to do it. But you don't have the stress of gravity working against you. You're buoyant, right? So it does help a lot. That's a great suggestion. So get your kids swimming. Okay, that was the number one suggestion for today. Get your kids swimming because it will help. All right, well, that's what I wanted to hit. I think we did a great job kind of squishing a lot of information into a relatively short period of time. And if that's all you have to say, I just want to always emphasize Heather has another podcast that you need to go listen to, okay? Mondays at 2, okay? What channels are they on, Heather?
On Instagram or Facebook at The Hidden Churn or Brain Balance of the Woodlands, Katy, Mansfield, or Southlake.
Okay, go to those pages, follow her. Always has a great podcast that's very informational, different from what we do here, right? So different information, different guests. So get a lot of information. Go follow and make sure you watch those Monday at 2. And all the previous ones are on there still, right? So they're never taken off, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Perfect. So you can go back. There's plenty of information for you. If you need to get a hold of me, 972-387-4700. That's a great way to call me. You can follow me, Dallas Energy Chiropractic, both on Facebook and Instagram. If you have any questions that are coming up, I wish they would have talked about this. Please comment or direct message us. We'll be happy to respond to that. And then, as always, if this helps you or you think this could help somebody else, please share. This is all about you guys. We do this for you because we love you. We want to serve the communities or the families in our community. So please share it. There's always somebody out there who needs more information. So, all right. Otherwise, we will be back next Thursday. I'm excited to be back on this routine. The summer kind of got disrupted a little bit, but we're back on a good routine. And so I'm excited. We'll be here next Thursday, same time.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.